This is my study of one of the most well-known Bible stories of all time. It's the miracle recorded in all four of the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the multiplication of loaves and fish. Word had gotten out. King Herod had beheaded John the Baptist. There's a tombstone here. R.I.P. J.B. I painted it blue, the color of water, because he baptized Jesus and many others. At the foot of the tombstone, you'll see a locust, and there's bees all about my painting. My tribute to John the Baptist, whose favorite meal was locust and honey. Jesus knows he'll spend eternity in paradise with John, but he fully experiences the sorrow that comes from a loss of a loved one here on earth. It was also the day that Jesus' 12 closest friends were returning from their first ever mission trip. We remember Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, gave them all the power to heal the sick and to cast out demons. So Jesus' plan for this day was for him and his friends to get in the boat, head across the Sea of Galilee, and leave the crowds behind. They were headed for the mountains. You'll see my abbreviation for mountain here, MT. Headed for the mountains for some time alone in fellowship together. Before they reached their destination, the crowds had made their way by foot and were already on the other shore waiting for him before he arrived. And when Jesus looked up and he saw the crowds, he was filled with compassion, and he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. The sheep are on that side of the canvas. The shepherd's staff is on this side of the canvas. Jesus realized God had a different plan for the day. So Jesus disregards his plan to do the work of God, and he continues teaching the crowds all day long. As the sun begins to set, the disciples come to Jesus, and they encourage him to disperse the crowd, to send them to nearby villages in hopes to get some food. And in 3 of the 4 gospel accounts, Jesus says, "You give them something to eat." I have the words written here in this red strip that is the horizon of the painting. The words written in red. Jesus' words. He says to the disciples, "You give them something to eat." And in the Gospel of John, Jesus asks Philip where they can go to get enough food to feed this crowd. And the scriptures tell us Jesus was giving him a test because Jesus knew what he was going to do. Philip's answer, you'll see Philip written on this side of the canvas. His answer to Jesus: 200 days, the sunshines represent days, wages would not be enough for each of them to have a little. Philip is basically saying, impossible. There's no way we can provide enough food for this crowd. So Jesus asked the disciples how much food they have. And Andrew, that's Simon Peter's brother, Andrew, comes to Jesus. He said, "There's a lad here who has 2 fish and 5 barley loaves." And he almost dismisses it with his next comment. "But what's that for so many?" W-hats, W-H-A-T-S, that for the many is written in stitches, representing sewing. What's that for so many? Big question mark. Did you catch that? There's a lad here? I've overlooked him all of these years. And I realize I might not be the only one who's overlooked this lad. He's only mentioned in the Gospel of John. There's no mention of him in the 3 other Gospels. So I wonder, was John right next to Jesus when this offering was made, close enough to see the child? And were the others close enough to Jesus to see the offering, but far enough away, just far enough away, that something was obstructing their view of the child? It's easy to overlook a child in a large group of people. It's just a theory. And now, I would like to introduce you to my new friend, the lad who provided the loaves and the fish. You'll see the basket containing the offering. My friend is underneath of it. Here's his hair and his forehead. Lad is written in his hair. His hands holding up the basket and his toes in the grass below. It's like he's holding everything up to Jesus. I start to spend some time with my new friend. I wonder, what was his day like? He must have been in the crowd listening to Jesus for at least some of the day, if not all of it, because he was just close enough to Jesus at the right time to overhear him ask the disciples how much food they had. So my friend has a choice. Free will. We all have it. Upon hearing Jesus ask the question, my friend could have looked in his basket, looked up at the crowd, and reasoned exactly what Andrew did. What's this for so many? And my friend could have pretended he didn't hear the question and easily disappeared into the crowd and kept everything for himself. Or he could have done something like I would have done. I'll share my food with Jesus. One for Jesus, one for me. One for Jesus, one for me. See what I did there? Jesus ends up with 3 loaves and 1 fish. I'm only going to keep 2 loaves and 1 fish. That's how generous I am. Or, if my heart was really big that day, I might have reasoned something like this. If I had eaten one of these loaves earlier, I wouldn't have it now. So I'll just take it for myself and I'll give everything else to Jesus. 4 loaves and 2 fish. I am so generous. This lad didn't do any of those things, because there's another choice. My friend goes right over and gave all he had to Jesus. He didn't even look at the circumstances around him. I'm pretty impressed with my new friend. And as I spend more time with him, I start to look at his food. And I realize in 3 of the 4 gospel accounts, it's called out that he gave 2 fish and 5 loaves. But in the Gospel of John, it's called out 2 fish and 5 barley loaves. This is further evidence that John was right next to Jesus at the time the offering was made, close enough to tell what type of loaf was in the basket. And the others might have been just far enough away that they couldn't tell the type of bread that was in the basket, but they could see the amount. John gives us an important clue by mentioning barley loaves. Barley was the food of the very poor. That means my friend was a member of a very poor family. Now, these loaves were not like loaves of bread we're used to, where there's enough for a couple meals and plenty to share. These were small, little loaves of barley, probably no bigger than the fist of a child. So you notice in my painting, the loaves are about the same size as my friend's hands. That means the fish aren't very big either. It's safe to say this was all the food my friend had for the entire day, and he couldn't count on having that much food tomorrow, if any. This deepens the gravity of the choice my friend made, in my eyes. Because my friend gave what little he had without counting the cost. And I wonder, has my friend ever experienced what it's like to have a full stomach? I don't know. I can just imagine the smile on Jesus' face when he receives everything my friend has. He takes the offering and he instructs the crowds to sit. Jesus, represented by the cross, he instructs the crowds to sit. And he has the disciples divide the crowd into groups of hundreds and fifties. I think this is the reason why all 4 gospel accounts come up with the same estimate for the size of this crowd. They all estimate that it's 5,000 men plus women and children. But this also reminds me that God is a God of order and not confusion. Because when you're getting ready to deal with a large crowd and you're going to introduce food, without some sort of order, there's going to be chaos. So Jesus takes the offering and he blesses it. He thanks God for it. He blesses it and he breaks it and he gives it to the disciples and he divides the fish and gives it to the disciples. My friend's offering was blessed, broken, and given. This is a pattern. But there's another pattern underneath of that pattern. Jesus gives to the disciples give to the people. The more the disciples give to the people, the more the disciples receive from Jesus. This isn't just a pattern, it's a principle. This story is one of my favorite examples of Bible math. If I were to write out this miracle as a math equation, it would look something like this. 2 fish plus 5 barley loaves multiplied by Jesus, and 5,000 plus 5,000 men plus women and children ate until they were full. Everyone eats until they're full. That includes my friend. How amazing is this? My friend gives what little he has for the day, and in return, he receives the biggest meal of his life. So after everyone is full, Jesus instructs the disciples to collect the leftovers. You'll see the arrow coming out of this 8 comes over top of the equation and to the left. It's a leftover. The disciples collect 12 baskets of leftovers after everyone was full. With God, there is nothing wasted. Everyone's needs had been met that day. Their spiritual needs had been met by Jesus teaching them all day long. Their stomachs were all full. And so it's safe to say they were content. And Jesus could read their hearts. He knew they were planning to take him by force and make him king here on earth. And the story ends with Jesus retreating from the crowds, going to the mountains to be alone. I wonder how he was feeling. He was mourning the loss of a loved one. He disregarded his plans for the day when he saw God had a different plan. He taught the crowds all day and just performed the greatest miracle to feed them all. This crowd had not only witnessed a miracle, they participated in the miracle. And they still missed it. Jesus tells us over and over again in the scriptures that his kingdom is not of this world. Jesus' desire then is the same as it is today and always will be, to be the king of each individual heart. My new friend has reminded me of several important lessons. First, the power of one. One heart fully committed to Jesus is a mighty tool because he is proof that one little child can make a big difference. That you're never too young to be useful in the hands of the living God. And the opposite side of that coin, you're never too old either. You've probably noticed I don't know his name. None of us here ever will. And that lesson, that even if the world never knows your name, that does not disqualify you from being useful in the hands of the living God. My new friend inspires me to give all I have to Jesus without counting the cost. And he assures me that what little I have will be more than enough when placed in the hands of Jesus. My new friend is a visual example for me of what it truly looks like when Jesus is the king of one's heart. The more time I spend creating this painting, I have this feeling of fullness. It doesn't make sense. It sounds weird. But what I realize is that my friend's offering was just blessed, broken, and given to me. And it occurs to me that every time this miracle is read and passed on from generation to generation, my friend's offering continues to be multiplied infinitely. If you would like to check out the miracle for yourself, you can find it in Matthew chapter 14, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, and you can find the story and meet my friend in John chapter 6. The whole time I'm painting this, something's drumming around in the back of my head, just always back there. Blessed, broken, given, blessed, broken, given, just always there. And one day, I'm reading John's account of the miracle, and I read past the miracle. And the scripture leaps off the page. Jesus is the bread of life. And it occurs to me, the Last Supper, when Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples. And then one other time, after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, he meets his friends on the shore to have another meal, and he takes the bread and he blesses it, breaks it, and gives it. Blessed, broken, given. It's a pattern all throughout the scriptures.